Welcome to the 25th episode of Tokyo Alumni Podcast. Today, our guest is the managing partner and CEO of Plug and Play Japan, a subsidiary of Plug and Play Tech Center located in Silicon Valley. He started working for Plug and Play in Silicon Valley in 2014 and headed both the IoT division and mobility division before moving to Tokyo to start Plug and Play in 2017. Plug and Play Japan is focused on creating the largest innovative platform in Japan, connecting startups and larger corporations worldwide with hubs in Tokyo and Kyoto. Prior to working for Plug and Play, he was an account executive for Uniqlo Kisco, the U.S. subsidiary of Kisco, a large Japanese trading company focused on chemicals and material. He graduated from San Diego State University and has spent roughly half of his life in Japan and the other half in the United States of America. Welcome to the podcast, Seiji.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I called you Seiji because that's what people called you in high school. But I guess now you go by Phillip or CEO or.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, maybe dual identity crisis. But Seiji was kind of basically a nickname for myself. It is my middle name, but what people call me kind of in an international school and in that community. But outside of it, my family, my parents, work usually go by Phillip.
Today, we'll probably go with Seiji just because that's what I'm used to. Yeah, it's always interesting, right? With people with two passports, some people have the two names, other people have the same name, and
yeah, especially with us, the mixed breed usually has kind of the one American or more Western name, and then kind of one Japanese name, and then kind of usually choosing one or the other, or one is the nickname, and kind of using that as their identity. So it can get confusing.
Today, you're coming in from the Shibuya office, right, for your company Plug and Play. You brought this project over to Japan, and you've also mentioned off record about how you actually have 3 people already involved with your company from ASIJ.
Yep.
So how did that come to fruition? How did you contact people? And, that's a lot of people in one company that's from ASIJ.
It is, yeah. To clarify, one of them is actually on my team in Japan, and 2 of them works kind of on our Japan-focused accounts in Silicon Valley, so 2 of them are at our headquarters. When I initially came to Japan to set up Plug and Play here in Tokyo, I did reach out to kind of the ASIJ alumni network and see if anybody was kind of interested in joining Plug and Play or to be part of this field. Shingo Ehara, I think you're familiar with him, reached out to me and said he was interested, met up a couple times, and he became kind of one of my first hires in Japan. But I think this job specifically really resonates with the international community because it is somewhat what I'm doing is bridging Japan and the world, bridging Japan and Silicon Valley and corporates and startups globally to Japan. So we look for bilingual, bicultural people can make a bigger impact in our company than people who are not.
So with this Plug and Play, so what exactly do you guys do? And when you brought it over to Japan, what were sort of the challenges of sort of incorporating the Silicon Valley project in the Japanese market?
Kind of a hard company to explain in a short time, but I'll try. But we're startup accelerator, startup incubator, venture capital, if you've heard any of those terms. But in a nutshell, we support startups, and either that's through funding. So we're venture capital in terms of we do invest in startups for equity. And we do that globally, a couple hundred startups per year in very early stages. We also do that in Japan as well. In terms of the accelerator portion, these are kind of industry-specific, corporate-sponsored 3-month programs where we source and scout startups from all over the world and have them join this 3-month program for us to be able to support them, give them the services and resources that they need to grow, and connect them to different corporate players, and hopefully for them to be able to connect with the corporates, engage with them in a way that would eventually be able to collaborate, partner, help their business kind of go to the next level. So we kind of create that platform, if you will.
So these corporations that you help get started, there was actually a guest a few episodes ago who tried to explain to me what an incubator was. I kind of understood it, I think. And is there a specific profile to the type of companies that you guys support? Are they also tech-based, or is it a bit more variety?
It is a variety, usually technology-based, but we do work in various industries. So, for example, in Japan, we have a health program, a retail-based program, fintech or financial technology, insurtech, insurance technology, and various other fields. So any startup that kind of touches any of those industries is some company that we can help. And if they are prepared to and at a stage where they can kind of collaborate with different large corporates, so in Japan that would be the Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, Fujitsu, Nissan, all these companies that want to connect with startups. We're kind of the intermediary between these large corporate innovation guys looking for technology and the startup guys looking to be able to work with all these big companies. So we're kind of the middleman between that.
So this startup culture is obviously very much, native to the American DNA, right? Especially Silicon Valley. It seems like everyone has their own, idea and their own startup. So when you brought over this idea to the Japanese market, was there some resistance at first? Because, there is sort of this culture in Japan where people, work for a company and there's no longer shushin koyo where, they work till they die, but there's still very much this resistance towards, going into the startup. So did you have any resistance in the market overall?
Many different hurdles and challenges. But maybe before I get into that, I should maybe preface this with, we believe, and maybe even the world believes now, that startups are changing the world. So you see the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Teslas, you go back to the Googles and Facebooks. These are companies that have been born very recently that's disrupting various different industries, markets, regions, and for the corporates that have been around for decades, if not centuries, it's kind of sink or swim for them. You either innovate, change your business, work with the startups, or you won't be alive in the next 10 to 20 years. A lot of people are seizing that opportunity in terms of starting companies that could potentially disrupt these large corporates or markets. Guys who are investing in startups to make money off of that, and guys like us who run these programs that support the startups connect into the corporates. And of course, the corporates kind of sponsor these programs to be able to do this. Silicon Valley obviously kind of really sees that opportunity. It became a global hub for startups, for entrepreneurs, for technology. And this culture, the startup culture, is really expanding into various other regions. So there are a lot of startup venture capital, startup incubators, startup accelerators that are born and located in Silicon Valley, and Plug and Play is one of those companies. Plug and Play itself was born in 2006 with this idea to support startups, and since then have been globally expanding into various other cities, right now in over 35, Japan one of them. But going back to the question of then bringing Plug and Play to Japan was initially brought up when in Plug and Play Silicon Valley, part of my job was to help Japanese companies visiting Silicon Valley and trying to meet startups, bridge that gap. But it was very hard for Japanese companies to meet and work with startups in a way because the Japanese conservative business culture and the very innovative, fast, flexible startup culture is kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. But Japanese companies are kind of realizing, understanding, okay, startups are, changing the world. We need to work with them. What do we do? And Plug and Play is one of the companies that they go to figure out how to utilize startups and their innovation roadmap. So I was doing a lot of matching between corporates and startups, but kind of realizing it really wasn't fitting in, or Japanese companies was not sure how to work with startups. How to treat startups. And startups wasn't kind of realizing how to work with Japanese corporates because they're very conservative, very slow, not necessarily always being able to speak English, risk averse, fear of failure, all these concepts that make it really hard for these two entities to work with each other. And then I kind of realized, part of the reason why this wasn't working between Japanese corporates and global startups is that Japan as a country, a lot of Japanese corporations is just really not adept to incorporate modern innovation and startups. And kind of the reasons, like I said, their business culture, their social culture, is such a huge gap between what the startup culture is that we need to first educate Japan that working with startups, being able to collaborate and partner with outside entities is the way to continue growth and even help Japan as a country and its economy to stay relevant. So that's kind of the mission that I had initially when I first came to Japan. But of course, it's easier said than done. A lot of these Japanese companies are still not structured in a way to innovate in a very Silicon Valley way. So what we're doing here is a lot of education, a lot of mindset changes, a lot of somewhat cultural changes, and then being able to introduce startups to hopefully create new businesses and products out of Japan.
So playing this role of sort of matchmaker, do you feel like your background of, being from an international school as well as being a US and Japanese, background, do you feel like that has given you sort of a leg up in regards to sort of being like, hey guys, I'm like on both sides?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was kind of key. And being bilingual, bicultural, spending half my life in Japan, half my life in the US, you really kind of learn the differences of business and culture, and you kind of use that to your advantage to be able to communicate with both sides and bridge the gap. So for Japanese clients and corporates that I interface with, I'm kind of the American guy who understands Japanese culture and is half Japanese and is from Silicon Valley, has a Japanese name. So I'm a kind of a good enough mix so that they trust me, but also kind of foreign enough so that they kind of want to learn new stuff from me. But yeah, it is kind of helpful to have this background, as I kind of created a niche for myself to be able to bridge the two cultures for sure.
Tokyo is Japan obviously has this, reputation of being very technological, but things have changed a lot in the last few decades. There's been the rise of places like Shenzhen are becoming new tech hubs. Yep. And from what you've observed, living in Tokyo the last few years, as well as being in Silicon Valley, to me, I feel like there's this duality in regards to tech in Japan. On one hand, everyone thinks like everyone in Japan has their own like personal robot, like Doraemon style. And like, on the other hand, it's like people use fax machines, and right. I teach high schoolers and they don't even know what a fax machine is. So like, that's how much a gap there is. So what's the deal with that? Like, why is there such a gap?
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So there's this kind of weird image of people still thinking Japan is this technological leader, super superior in terms of technology, IT, everything, which is somewhat true, but of course, not exactly true in terms of modern technology or software or artificial intelligence. Or data analytics and all these kind of new technology trends that Japan is a little behind of. But, you look back in terms of Japan in the 1970s, 80s, 90s, Sony, Panasonic, the Walkman, and all these kind of innovations that Japan used to have that really catapulted Japan into this brand of being the technology and innovation leader. So Japan definitely used to kind of have that title and badge. A lot of Japan is still stuck in that age. So because that age and era has been so successful for Japan, they haven't had the necessity and need to continue innovating, because in a way they were so successful, the country in which, these Fortune 500 companies rule Japan in a lot of ways, still a lot of markets and industries around the world. So compared to other cities, region, Japan really hasn't had the need to innovate as fast, as quick, or as globally as other countries have recently.
Do you see any other type of like innovative changes that big Japanese conglomerates like, Sony, Panasonic are trying to do?
Yeah, so Japanese companies and Japan as a country is kind of realizing that their kind of strategy for innovating is much slower and later compared to a lot of other countries in the world. So that has definitely kind of put a spotlight on trying to support the startup ecosystem within Japan, whether there's a country or Tokyo as a city, or Kyoto, also Osaka, all these cities, not only corporates, but government and then universities too, is making a huge push in terms of entrepreneurship education, funding, support, and then corporate collaboration. So you do see a lot of these accelerators, incubators, venture capitals now being born in Japan as well. So there is definitely this huge wave and push to be able to support startups, support innovation. And companies like Sony, Panasonic kind of are creating their own accelerators, own incubators, own venture capital, kind of their own startup strategy to be able to cope with this new change.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Because a second ago when you were talking about these companies that were disruptors, it's like I was just thinking, yeah, Airbnb came out, I think, after high school.
Yeah.
Google's been around, I think not even 20 years, right?
About 20 years, actually. Yeah.
About 20 on the dot. Yeah. So it's true that all these companies are just so new and they're changing the game. So just switching gears a little bit, still on the topic of professional work, something that really I feel strongly about is dress. And we spoke about this a bit off air, right? The definition of professionalism is evolving, right? Everyone used to wear a suit even when they went to go buy eggs, like in 1955. And now I feel like Silicon Valley is sort of spearheading this change. And I specifically, like to bring up your case because I see you in the press, like Mainichi Shimbun. I've seen you in Yahoo Japan, and you're never wearing a collared shirt or a tie. So I was wondering if you wanted to address sort of this Silicon Valley culture. Maybe also a sort of a follow-up question with that is this culture of Patagonia. Is that how you say it?
Patagonia, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So what you've witnessed and whatnot. So yeah.
Yeah. So first of all, the t-shirt and jacket is kind of the very Silicon Valley costume that people are accustomed to there. That kind of became the new modern business casual professional look. I'm supposed to at least embody Silicon Valley here in Japan. So that kind of in a way default became my costume. It is weird walking around Japan doing business meetings in a t-shirt. But again, kind of that's my persona in Japan. So that I kind of feel like that's kind of my costume. So even today, this is kind of a typical wear dress for me. It's just a t-shirt. This is not a jacket, but a logoed hoodie, which is also very startup-y. Professionalism has historically been suit and tie, and that's kind of the only way to look professional or look good. But the definition of that is completely changing. And you can have a range of styles of wear and dress and also look professional at the same time. So that's kind of one of, I guess, the small cultural changes that we're trying to bring in Japan. And to your other point, Patagonia has taken this kind of weird branding and image in Silicon Valley as well. Investors, for example, with their Patagonia vests is kind of another image you see from time to time in Silicon Valley. So it's just kind of different trends that people are picking up and trying to create new modern trends, just like startups are, to change kind of this mindset that people have of what it used to be and historically is right should be right now. So,
Yeah, I love that culture, though. I love that culture of just new ideas, innovation, and how, things, just because they were one way 50 years ago doesn't mean that it's right today.
Right, yes, it's just purposefully trying to be different, I guess, in a way.
So you work now, sort of bridging Japan, US. Do you foresee more international school students, like graduates, working at Plug and Play, and as well as the general industry that you're part of?
Yeah, I hope so. And you do see kind of international students in this general realm of either startups or startup support companies or even venture capital. But international students in Japan really does have this unique position of bridging two cultures that's not necessarily bridged too often, because partially Japan as a country is so homogeneous. Not a lot of people that are very global, very international, or speak English for that matter. So people like you and me and a lot of other people in international schools are very bicultural between Japan and any other country in the world. So I think they're coveted. We're still looking for them. I think companies are trying to look for them. I think Japanese, from startups to corporations, can use people that could bridge their company in the world. And I think international students are positioned well to be able to be that person.
That's really good to hear that, the international school students have that spot in society. And it seems like a very important role, as you said, in such a homogeneous society in Japan. Maybe they can add that little spark. And as you sort of inferred to, I don't know if you inferred, you said in the beginning, because you're half Japanese, they kind of trust you a little bit more. They don't feel as much of the black bow, the kurofune, like it's just, you're already a little bit on the inside, and you kind of are a nice, matchmaker for these two different cultures.
To that point, definitely still kind of funny stories of me going into a meeting, and, my name that I use is Phillip Vincent. So people are expecting this complete foreigner American guy to come in to do this meeting, and they usually try to shake my hand and say nice to meet you, then which is usually followed by me going, Nihongo harasemasu, I can speak Japanese, and pulling out my meishi, and they're like, oh my god, like he's the Silicon Valley American guy that speaks Japanese and understands Japanese culture, like he's our guy, we need to befriend this guy. So it's this weird unique position that, like you said, I'm kind of foreign, but at the same time trustworthy because I'm bicultural.
So what I like to do at the end of the podcast is I like to have the guests sort of just talk about what's coming up in their lives the next few years, even next few decades, if you're that audacious to talk about the next few decades. And I like to sort of just hand over the mic figuratively to you and just tell us what's to come in the next few years.
Oh boy, that is a tough question. But, since 3 years ago, I started Plug and Play in Japan on my own. Now we're up to almost 40 people on staff. We opened up a Kyoto branch last year. We're opening up another branch later this month, actually. So to continue to scale this business in Japan is something that I will continue to do for the next handful of years. And to kind of really be that hub and central figure in Japan as a catalyst for innovation and change and kind of the startup culture that Japan, I think, desperately needs. So I think in the next decade or so, if we can kind of be a part of that huge wave and change, then I think that's something that I would like to make happen.
That's really exciting to hear. So you said 40 employees now. How many were you guys when you started?
Just by myself.
Wow. So that's a what, 4,000% rise. So
it's a big rise, but I mean, of course, we're a subsidiary, so we had the network and connection and support from HQ. But yeah, it was basically like starting a small startup in Japan on my own, and that was very challenging and very exciting.
Well, I wish you, as well as the fellow ASIJ underclassmen, the best of luck, and so I'm sure paths will cross somewhere sometime.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, come stop by and come say hi.
Well, thank you for being on our 25th episode, and have a good day. Bye.
Great. Thanks for having me.